and welcome to Queer on El Paso. In this episode, Asylum and Advocacy, we turn our attention to our borders and some of the struggles LGBTQ immigrants face in seeking asylum.
LGBTQ asylum seekers endure even greater danger and mistreatment than the general population, frequently encountering violence during their journey to the border. In addition, there is a severe shortage of shelter spaces specifically for queer individuals at the border. Unlike many other migrants, queer migrants often lack eligible family members to sponsor them on the other side, leading to heightened risks of detention and increased rates of violence within detention facilities.
Our guests today are Jennifer Babaie, who is the Director of Advocacy and Legal Services at Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center here in El Paso. She is joined by Gabriela Lopez, who is a legal assistant at the organization.
Thank you both for talking to Queer on El Paso.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Can you all tell us a little bit about the organization, what your mission is, and what work you all do on behalf of immigrants?
Okay, on paper or on the website, it's broken down as quality legal services to the most vulnerable migrants that are in our community. And that includes southern New Mexico, West Texas, and Ciudad Juarez. But I feel like if I were to describe it, what we do is we accompany. So we walk where the migrants need to walk, and we figure out what access, what legal tools they need. And we help them try to open those doors and again get the legal services they deserve.
And how does an immigrant learn about your services, or how do they come across, how do they cross paths with the things that you're able to provide them?
One is the chisme around the community.
Good. I love that you understand what chisme is.
I didn't need transplant, but I know the fronteriza Spanish.
Gabby, did you teach her that?
But a lot of it, I mean, Gabby, what do you think? Because you've lived here, but what I have noticed is that people talk to one another and say, my uncle, my sister was served by Las Americas, and now I need help, and you know, can you work on my case?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody forms fast communicating networks like immigrants, okay? Especially now that technology is available, right? A WhatsApp message can travel so far, so fast. But also there's other places, because Las Americas has been an institution in El Paso for quite a long time now. There are places where people get this information from, like immigration court. They might be told, you know, there are these local organizations that might be able to provide you services, or from other organizations in town as well. So it's really a mixture of places, but most of it is from word of mouth.
Word of mouth. And interesting that you say that there's really kind of a network of immigrants. I mean, they're all kind of experiencing this process together, and so they kind of learn to rely on each other for this type of information.
Absolutely.
So specifically, when somebody comes across your organization or they approach you, one, how do they approach you? I mean, how do they call you? Do they show up on your doorstep? And what would you then do to assess what needs they might be requiring at that time?
Okay, so it's a mixture of both of those, right? We have folks that diligently call, folks that would rather come in and talk to someone, because we know that a person's case might be layered, right? So people will come in and tell us their life story, and we'll kind of have to discern, like, okay, what you need is this. Okay, what you're telling me is this. And so, yeah, really it's a mixture. So we'll listen to, again, whatever life story folks bring us to, and see what resources we have available. And aside from filling out paperwork for them, what does advocacy for that person mean? Does it mean pushing the envelope with government agencies and trying to request something that has not been requested before, but we might as well give it a shot? Does it involve accompanying someone to an appointment? So it's really a mixture of what will you need to be okay and to have your voice heard before these agencies.
It's a triage, seriously. Like, if you think about the emergency room comparison, someone comes in on the doorstep, and like Gabby's saying, they'll tell you their whole life story, and your job is to find the nuggets in between what they've shared, so you can determine what the easiest, most logical follow-up question is, so you can get to the heart of what they might need.
It's interesting, because I was going to say, and to each individual person, it's an emergent case.
Exactly.
It's emergent to them, because they need to get this settled.
I think one of the things is that when we think of immigration, we think of it as this really big, huge issue that's really undigestible, because I don't think anybody truly understands all the nuances that encompasses. But in reality, we're talking about individual cases and human beings, people that have their own story to tell and their different reasons and different needs. And so what I'm getting is that Las Americas is welcoming and wanting to listen to them and understand what their needs are.
Exactly. I'll tell you that our programs change sometimes monthly, sometimes every couple months, because people come in with new questions and we figure out that we haven't served a need.
And because the system changes so often.
Yeah.
This is one of the fields where there are changes like every 3 months or so. So as soon as there's something new, we might have had a list of people who were on a wait list for a service we couldn't offer and realize like, oh, we can serve this community now.
That's changed now,
Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit, let's pivot a little bit. We understand kind of what you all do kind of in the general scheme. In terms of the LGBTQIA, which we'll call queer community, queer immigrants, people coming here from different parts of the world that either come here to seek asylum because of their sexuality or because of their sexual gender identification. Tell us a little bit about those cases and some of the challenges in serving that community.
I'll tell you about my first border case for a queer client. I was still living in New York, and this individual got flagged for me by a caseworker in Juarez. The individual needed hormone treatment because they had been transitioning and then were forced to flee. Nowhere would serve them in Ciudad Juarez. And so we made a humanitarian parole request solely based on the fact that they needed to continue the treatment and that it was going to be a threat if they couldn't. And also that being stuck in between was completely unsafe for them, living in shelters on the border. This was back in 2022. We made the claim and it took a lot of back and forth, but they were able to claim humanitarian parole and enter the U.S. and seek asylum just based on that medical need. That has totally changed now, but that's the kind of situations that we see come up.
How has it changed, Jennifer?
Oh, the policies right now are so dehumanizing that that kind of appeal, something so rational such as I'm an asylum seeker and based on my sexuality, I have this medical need. If you're not dying on the Border Patrol's doorstep, that's not considered urgent. That's the reality we live in now. And life and death doesn't mean that you're queer living in an unsafe space anymore.
What's interesting, though, is that I was doing some research, and it seems to me that people that stop suddenly their hormone treatment, they can fall into a depression almost immediately.
Yes.
And then you start thinking about suicide ideation, and if that isn't life-threatening, I don't know what is.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And then we have the people who show up at the border who might not have specifically been harassed because of their sexual orientation or sexuality, but once they come into custody of Border Patrol or ICE, their lives are now in danger while they're in detention, right? Because access to proper and gender appropriate care in there is almost non-existent, right? Trans migrants there are many cases of where trans migrants have been placed in
solitary confinement.
Confinement or in dormitories, and I'm saying that with like quotation marks, for that are not gender appropriate, right? So like trans women that have been placed in dormitories for men, right? And so unfortunately, there's another level of harassment that they experience in there. So if they hadn't already, experienced traumatizing things on the way here, now that they're on American land in detention, their lives are very much actually in danger. Folks who might not end up in Border Patrol or ICE custody, who might end up on the street, they also have another whole slew of vulnerabilities. I'm sure we all remember December 2022 when there were hundreds of migrants outside of Sacred Heart Church in downtown El Paso. A lot of those folks were very ill. We had trans folks who were HIV positive, LGBTQIA folks that were HIV positive, and they had nowhere to get treatment from. And so whatever situation they come in, they're guaranteed it will become more complicated once they start the process of going through all these government agencies.
Yeah.
It's harrowing. I mean, it seems like you said, I think that, they come here for solutions and they have to realize that they have to deal with a whole host of new problems to get to that solution. And so that is a very difficult task. Then that's probably why they need advocacy along every step of that way.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask, what kind of advocacy do you provide when someone presents with a need for HIV medication?
Well, I mean, one, we have referral connections in and around El Paso. So we would try to reach out to medical providers that we know who, and it's not just here. Of course, some migrants move on. So then we just get on the phone, we do some research, we go online, figure out, okay, you're going to Chicago. Let's find a hotline there or an organization where you can show up literally the day after you arrive. So you see someone and they're aware that you're now in their community and you need services. But sometimes the reality is that there is no resource. And when that happens, then we become the resource for better or for worse. And at some points it's a privilege, and other points it's really traumatic because we're not social workers, and it's really painful hearing from someone week after week knowing that you can't give them the next thing that they need.
One of the unique challenges that might be not specific to the queer community, but to a lot of queer immigrants that are coming here based on looking for asylum, based on their sexuality or their gender identity, is that they may not have family in this country to rely on. They don't have that kind of connection that other immigrants may have, that they have family, because one, either they're ostracized by their family, or they're fleeing their family, or there simply is no family here. And so how does that challenge present itself, and how do you all work through that in terms of helping to alleviate some of that fear?
Well, you go through that triage effect, right? So first and foremost, we're just where do you want to live? If you're staying in El Paso, let's get you into a shelter if you feel safe, so at least we have a temporary place to keep you while we figure out what the next step is. And then we've been doing this for so many years that we have enough connections that our shelter contacts will then let us know about where someone could go next to stay long term. So the humanitarian reception, as we call it, is so crucial. You can't get by just having legal services. We're one tool of many that someone needs when they're here.
Yeah. Also because, again, people's lives are layered, right? They're going to need more than legal services.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you can't find any organization, sometimes we've relied on our individual contacts. I met this person who was hosting people at their home for a bit, and they're down to help, So there is also a network of people who will show up when there's crisis and are down and available to put their private homes or resources to help alleviate.
I love that about El Paso.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like a little underground railroad.
100%.
We were just talking about the personality of our community, and it is very welcoming. And I mean, it is quite in contrast, as we were pointing out, to other parts of this state and other parts of this country, where they're kind of villainizing immigrants, and El Pasoans are going, well, they need clothes and they need food. Let's get them that. And it's a very different perception outside of El Paso, as opposed to being part in this community and welcoming people that need our assistance, irrespective of what their sexuality is or what their needs are, or where they're coming or where they're going. So to that end, as which I don't think I do understand, to be honest with you, when the stay in Mexico policy was in place, are we still under that? Is there that if we've transitioned out of that, how is that better or worse for some of these immigrants?
Yeah, so the Stay in Mexico or Remain in Mexico program it's done. So we're not under it anymore.
Good.
It has been replaced with what I might call more dangerous and more sinister programming, in that our new laws right now operating on the border essentially punish someone for needing asylum. The law basically says if you don't come with the appointment process that that I have determined is the best one, which is through an app called CBP1 on your phone. If you don't come through this very particular method that requires a smartphone and access to the internet 24 hours a day, then you don't get asylum, which is totally contrary to all the laws on our books, contrary to international law, and also contrary to common sense.
Yeah.
Because if I'm running and someone is chasing me, or I feel unsafe, or I am queer in a shelter that is a gymnasium that has no privacy and no separation between anyone, I can't wait for your appointment. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to line up for a concert,
right?
You know,
right?
Yeah.
But it has become this mentality of like Ticketmaster: get in line, stalk it every day, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get the appointment at the time you need.
Assuming you scheduled it right, like assuming a whole bunch of factors, right? Mm-hmm. And aside from forcing people to use this one unreliable app, we also have the border essentially being pushed out further and further. So we've seen news about the U.S. government collaborating as well with like the Panamanian government, mm-hmm. right? Where they are now collaborating to also curtail groups of migrants traveling up through Central America, through Mexico. And so, in effect, this border wall keeps being pushed out mm-hmm. further south, further and further.
Yeah.
So you're a queer person escaping your country. You can't even make it through Central America anymore. Yeah. It gets even harder to try and reach that freedom that you so much need.
We're painting them into a corner, it seems like, yes. to me, and just kind of on our end saying, oh, well, we're making progress in terms mm-hmm. of helping this immigrants, mm-hmm. but in reality, they're simply being discouraged from coming here to begin with mm-hmm. when they may have very valid reasons right. for wanting to seek asylum.
Mm-hmm. What makes me nervous about that as an advocate is that we're paying attention to the wrong thing, and we are blaming the individuals and the communities that need and have the right to find a safer place for mm-hmm. them and their families, right? I mean, that is like our basic right is just give me an opportunity to live. And we're blaming them and saying it's about resources, it's about safety. And then I'm living here in a community way out in West Texas that Austin ignores, and we can handle the reception of these immigrants. It's not a problem. When the community is left to it, we do an incredible job. And so it's all just, it's a red herring by the right. government. We're totally focusing on the incorrect thing, and it's harming the very people that we should be embracing. And it drives me crazy.
The fear-mongering.
Yeah, it drives me nuts.
If everyone banded together,
yes.
it could be much more efficient and probably just helpful.
Yeah.
Which segues into, like everything, politics.
Yeah.
But obviously there are benefits to being divisive mm-hmm. for a lot of people. So it's a lot easier, like you said, a red herring to kind of hold these immigrants up and say, that they are criminals and they're vermin and they're attacking our borders.
To villainize.
Anybody that lives in El Paso knows that that's simply not true. Mm-hmm. But perception is everything. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the politicians in office right now benefit from that kind of fear. How do you deal with that in our community? I mean, do you see some of that echoed from your critics?
I would say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kathy, but I would just say I have noticed a shift in the 18 months I've lived here. So I admit I'm a transplant. There has been a slight shift, and I think it's a frustration to me. I have sensed a frustration that the rest of the country only thinks about El Paso because of immigration. And I understand that. It's a tone shift of we have more to offer. We're an entire community. We've been here for generations. Let us define ourselves. And that makes sense. But again, it's about divisiveness and scapegoating migrants for that reason, when it's the politics that's keeping out resources and mm-hmm. other development that would benefit the community here. Mm-hmm. The person coming here and living in a shelter isn't taking anyone's job. They're not taking anyone's resources. They're not taking the shirt off your back. But that's the concept that keeps getting pushed in. Mm-hmm. What are you gonna say?
I mean, I feel like there has been a shift to a more condemning perspective. However, I do feel like it depends how you're having these conversations with people. At least when I've had these conversations with folks, it's been on a one-on-one basis, and I feel like people have been more receptive to that degree, which is interesting. I feel, though, that more people are willing to question the whys of things. You know, for example, when we see news clips, right, that depict lots of people out on the streets, I feel like people have been more willing to ask why. Why am I being shown this? Why am I being told this storyline? What is this bigger message building onto? So I'm glad that people are willing to question things more. It at least lets us put our foot in the door to tell folks, like, hey, I do this every day. It's not the way it's shown on TV, on social media. Let me talk to you about what it is like every day.
And that's why we take those engagements. I mean, when we have been at like community events, church events, when we're in local parades or at a library or something, when you talk to people in those settings, I find it much more successful. People want to talk back and forth, and you entertain different ideology, and then you get to the bottom line of you share a story. Like, I know a couple that was separated because they were two gay men and they couldn't get married in Venezuela, and Border Patrol didn't recognize their relationship and only allowed one of them to enter. And you tell someone that, and then they relay it back to something that's happened in their family or a relationship that they know of that's in their friend group, and then they start to say, wow, that's really sad. Why did we need to do that? Why wouldn't we just recognize that marriage and allow them both to come in? And then you start to make headway of like humanizing this situation.
I think that's really the key. I think that people kind of, like I said, they kind of see things in these big swaths of picture instead of really looking at each individual stroke and saying this is a tapestry of all these different stories, and we kind of find it more comfortable to just ignore the individual stories. But to that end, a lot of the people that come through Mexico, particularly the LGBTQ people or people that are transitioning, they've had to face horrors in a lot of cases just to get to this point, only to be placed with a big brick wall in front of their face. And some of those stories are unnerving, and that's the stories that we're not sharing either. We're not telling people these people had to really have to, one, have the wherewithal to decide to leave their country based on who they were, to live their truth, and then they subject themselves to in what maybe months or years of degradation and torture and sexual trafficking and abuse and extortion, and we don't seem to be sensitive to that, to the story that for the person. By the time they show up to this border, that's all we see.
I think that's an educational problem, you know, and it's like you said, the people who are conscious enough to want to ask the questions, like they see a different perspective. The ones who succumb to the mob mentality, it's harder to change their minds as well.
And it takes more time, right, to give the nuanced example, which is why on the educational side, we have to get pretty creative and then try to figure out how to put this into the other work we're doing, our main work, which is the delivery of legal services. But we do have a responsibility, I think, to share the stories, because otherwise, how can I be upset that someone isn't as angry as I am at the way the rules apply when they don't know? Because the rules are written, it's death by bureaucracy. It's very Kafka, and you kind of have to showcase that. Like, look at this law that was written in a way that obviously was written by someone who had no idea what it would play out like in person. And then it's our job to say, look at what your black and white letter law did. Right. You need to change it.
Right.
Yeah, I read the humanitarian. As I was going through research about this, I also thought about the psychological aspects of the people that are going through all this torture, who are finding themselves turned away and homeless and those kinds of things, and then going through, sexual trafficking and things like that. What kinds of services can you all refer them to, or what do you offer in terms of those cases? Because I imagine that it's
tough,
quite psychologically traumatizing.
We absolutely make room for that. I mean, I know Gabby can talk about when we are screening potential clients that we might work with, that is always the flag you're looking for is what's going on with this person's psychological context, how is that impacting health? Because, by the way, you can't represent yourself. Like, you can't advocate for yourself and operate with a lawyer to file a case if you are mentally unwell.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Imagine like someone with ADHD about to take a bar exam. What do? We say we need accommodations. It's the same thing, but we don't have accommodations we can ask for.
Imagine you just traveled 2,000 miles through the desert,
Exactly.
you know, and you still have to understand what all of these legal terminology
Right.
is.
Exactly.
But keeping that in our radar also helps shape how we provide our legal services, right? We have to make sure that they are trauma-informed and client-centered, right? Folks that are usually requesting asylum have, again, gone through horrors that are unimaginable to us and that I hope remain unimaginable to us because it's suffering, you know, that I wouldn't wish on anyone. So, for example, someone comes in, they need help with asylum. We need to be careful about how we conduct our interviews, how we go about filing those paperwork, because the last thing we want is to re-traumatize somebody, right?
Yes.
They've already been through enough. They're here seeking help. The last thing you want is to be insensitive and hurt someone further than what they've lived through already.
Yeah, but I gotta say, we have some amazing orgs. I mean, there's Home, local organization, and they provide pro bono screenings for mental health when we think it could be useful and relevant to the case that we're working on. In Juarez, there's Día Derechos Humanos Integrales en Acción. They are such allies. They'll do social work screening. They'll refer the legal cases to orgs like ours. But their operation and protection of civil society in Juarez on the border is crucial for queer migrants that are coming in that need that kind of special care while they're waiting to come in to seek asylum.
How can we help as a community? I mean, what are some of the things that we can do as the LGBTQ community to, one, make people more aware or to simply help with services? What are some of the things that we can do?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you the ways. One, I want to share that we're breaking out this fall into this new sort of programming of clinics. Our goal is we need to meet more people. The demand for legal assistance in El Paso is huge. Mm-hmm. So we want to try to do workshops basically every week with different case types. So you, my friends, and many others can come and volunteer. You don't need any background in immigration, any background in law.
We will teach you.
We will teach you everything. And there's different ways to volunteer. Maybe you're the person that wants to set up. Maybe you're helping us print out and create the files, but you can't be there on the day of. There's 1,000,001 ways that you could just come, give us 2 hours of your time a month, and you're facilitating the extension of services pro bono to people. But the other ways are educate your friends, y'all. Educate your family and keep talking about immigration during an election year so that it's not the boogeyman. If I hear one more person tell me, well, the border is so open and it's being invaded and I just want people to come the right way. I mean, I've heard that in my family. And then I'm like, guys, we had stowaways. Yeah. Nobody came here the right way. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think we have a responsibility to know our history and then to apply it to our current day and say there is no right way because the right way shifts based on the policy in power at the time. And to have some grace and some humanity and to just not stop talking about it because migration's not going anywhere. It's the most natural thing humans have done. And we've been walking around changing our location for millennia. We're not going to change now because we're having an election and the US politicians are mad and don't want to deal with it.
I want to know next time somebody tells me the border is open, like where? Because waiting 2 or 3 hours to come back from Juarez every time it crosses not it. Where is it open?
I
Tell
can
me where this
show you that it's
open place
really
is.
close.
Yeah, we were stuck in Juarez on Friday when Microsoft tore down globally. Gabby and I were in Juarez. We got the notice around 10:30 a.m.
A little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But we were stuck out there for 5 hours. 6 hours.
And we're like, great, we'll get some margaritas. But my point being, it ain't open.
It's not, absolutely not. But also, I think for the wider queer community, I think that we need to come to terms with the fact that immigrant rights are LGBTQIA rights. Our queer siblings extend further than these borders.
Yep.
Our queer siblings are in detention. Our queer siblings are being deported. And so pride does not, LGBTQ rights do not reduce themselves to pride. There are plenty of our queer siblings who would love to connect with other people like them in this place that they are now trying to make home of. There are queer siblings that want to participate in pride events too, right? They want to partake in the joy that is living.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, in the greater scheme of things, people that are out in our community are living a very privileged life that is only imaginable to people that are coming here from other parts of the world where they're not able to live their truth. And so shedding some light by simply being open and honest about who you are and then sharing that pride with somebody is probably a very special gift that you could offer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my job in my previous job in New York, my supervisor at the time was a lesbian woman, and she would always mention her identity when she discovered that one of her clients was queer, and it made such a difference. It made such a big difference to say, oh, this person is operating in the U.S. as a lawyer, and they're just out. And it's not a problem.
That's something that we may take for granted now in this day and age, which, and even so, our rights aren't guaranteed anymore either. But certainly, I mean, coming from a more oppressive environment, that is something that's amazing and inspiring. It makes you want to become part of this country and to be able to live that truth.
I was going to say that's why they're traveling and going through all of these dangerous situations, is so that they can have the freedom to be who they are.
Is that part of your screening process? Do you ask people about their sexuality or their gender identity or their... You
Absolutely.
do?
It's relevant to everything.
So what are the challenges that brings? Because you may come across people that are afraid to tell you. You may have people that have come here. I read a story about a lesbian who came here, and she was hiding the fact that she was a lesbian and ended up coupling with a gentleman just to try and get through the system to avoid the discrimination that may be. So you're overcoming a lot of fear there that comes with the immigrant, but also fear of the system and not being used to being able to be vocal or out about who they are. So how do you all handle those issues?
It's a skill, right, Gabby? It's a skill. Yeah, like we take time to practice and learn the best ways to build trust within minutes. And sometimes we have to build that trust over the phone.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to build it without ever seeing our clients because they might be in custody, they might be in Border Patrol detention, and I don't have access to them. Right. It's everything from your tone of voice, from the language you use, and from how are you opening the conversation. I mean, I will start every conversation by saying, this is a rough way to meet each other. I know that this is the first time we're talking, but this is a safe place, and we talk about confidentiality, and we reiterate that over and over again, and we say, I'm here to help, so let's just start talking. And then you start with the easy questions. You ask, what's your name? How do you spell it? Who are you? You ask with those things to kind of like get someone even used to sharing anything about themselves. Sometimes sharing your birthday is scary, and once you kind of get past that, then you can get to the other questions. Does that match what your experience has been?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least when conducting these in-person interviews too, you need to be vigilant of like body language, right? You can usually tell when someone's uncomfortable, like a question kind of, made you uncomfortable. So it's about also acknowledging that. Okay, we don't need to talk about that right now. We're going to keep in contact. If at any point you have more information to add about your story, I'm happy to listen. Just keep in mind everything I ask you is to make sure that I can help you in every way that I can. So it does take a lot of observation, a lot of listening, but also being in tune with that person's willingness. Again, trauma-informed services.
Yeah. I do gotta say though, it does happen that sometimes you're representing somebody for a year, and then suddenly you learn, oh, they're gay, they have a partner that you didn't know about, or there was an incident, and then suddenly you're thinking to yourself, okay, great, and then internally you're panicking because you're like, how does this change my representation?
Right.
What do I need to do?
Right.
How do I make sure I take this into account? And you work with it.
Well, that brings a question. How does that affect how you handle a case? If somebody is clear at the very beginning saying, I am, and is there a difference between being a gay man, a lesbian, or a trans person? I mean, does that change your strategy and how?
I think let's start with like the detained context. So if someone is in federal immigration prison, that changes my entire advocacy because I need to know the details about, are they in the right gender norm? If they told me that they had been punished by a guard in the past, then I have to start thinking to myself, is it potential retribution because of their
hate crime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was it a hate crime by an officer? So it enlightens you in terms of what are the questions I need to ask about a person's circumstances so I can figure out if there's some advocacy I need to do just for their personal safety. It also determines what shelter I'm going to refer them to, especially if they're a trans client.
Right.
So that's just the physical reality. In terms of your pathways for immigration relief, outside of in the asylum context, it's very relevant because in the asylum context, you can use that as the root cause for why you may have faced persecution or why you might face it in the future. So without that nugget of information, you've just taken away an entire sort of pathway that would justify this person staying in the U.S. But I think that outside asylum, it's really case by case, and that our laws don't really reflect that well for it.
Right, and here's another piece to keep in mind. When a person is fighting their case, the immigration judge and even the government attorney is going to tear their story apart, right? So for example, if you are a queer individual, it depends what country you're from to convince the judge how much danger you're in. For example, a queer individual from Mexico, it might be harder for them to seek asylum because Mexico is seen as a gay-friendly country, right? Because they have policies in place that will allow you to change your gender on your official IDs.
Well, and there are destination hotspots for the privileged who can go and be openly queer in those spots, right?
But that doesn't speak to the cartels or to the discrimination in the streets or by the everyday person. Just because they have policies on paper does not paint a full picture.
Absolutely, yeah. So we know that culturally, right, that's not the case, right? So it may be as well that a client revealing their sexuality or gender identity to you might make the case a little harder. Again, because immigration judges and government attorneys are absolutely going to tear the story apart. And that's another thing that the wider American public doesn't see.
They fail to understand.
Right. The discourse talking about open borders does not take into account that people are torn apart in court while they're fighting their case. People that did it the right way are also going to be torn apart by whatever government agency is looking through their case. So it's not easy at all to present your case.
Right. They idealize it that once you apply, it's like, oh, okay, welcome.
It's like, they say, I'm a gay man, I'm seeking asylum, and they're like, oh, the doors open and rainbows are everywhere.
Your green card.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
And I gotta say, the immigration judges in particular, very suspicious of gay men that were married to women in their home country, come here and then want to make a claim based on that, with the argument that of course I wasn't open in said country. I quite literally couldn't be.
Right.
And I wanted a family, and this was the way for me to have a family. But that doesn't mean my identity isn't real.
And then how do you prove that?
Exactly.
And I think that's probably especially true for lesbians too, because I think there's this kind of cultural inherency issue where they say, well, she's not really a lesbian because she had a boyfriend in high school, or she has children, and bisexuality is the invisible slice of the pie. I mean, to say that you're even bisexual now, is that a cause for
denial?
No, but rather for asylum. Can I say I'm a bisexual person?
You could. But when we'd have to, like Gabby was saying, we'd have to make sure we find enough country conditions evidence. Your word alone is not enough.
Right.
we would have to still go and try to find data, research, anecdotes about how other individuals in a similar position to this person would be treated.
And this is even after someone who might have experienced atrocities.
Absolutely.
Right? Like all kinds of abuse, imprisonment, all kinds of things because of their sexual orientation.
But it doesn't matter.
And they're still here, and they're treated, for lack of a better phrase, like a woman who's been raped in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Re-traumatizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's difficult at every step of the way, right? While we're building a case, like Jen said, your word is not enough. So we have to supplement that with whatever evidence we have on hand. How many people have evidence of an assault that they were a victim of, right? And there are folks that might travel with evidence. There are folks that might have had the means, the time to get everything in a thumb drive, to print out documents, and then Border Patrol picks them up, they get taken into custody, and all their belongings are thrown away.
Right.
Even if
you can never get that. I cannot tell you all the amount of emails that come from national listservs of my client's phone, my client's passport, my client's tech devices were taken. How do they get them back? And the answer is most likely never.
You don't.
You don't.
even if they tell officers this is evidence, throw it away.
So it's almost like erasing those people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then making it that much more difficult, because it seems to me that the system is stacked to where they're not going to believe the immigrant at all.
Right.
And it's up to you all to kind of put it in a context to paint a picture of this is what this person is. But even if they're a rape victim
mm-hmm.
or an incest victim or you know, have been sold, you know, in trafficked, you know, there's no hardcore evidence, and it's not as if there's convictions that you can go to and say this person did this to me, because a lot of times they don't even know their names.
Yeah. Right.
And so they're really kind of have their own story and their own trauma that they're bringing to the table, that then they get told, well, we just need you to prove that to us.
Yeah.
You know, how do we believe you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the people I have such a soft spot for too are those that come out later in life. You know, I came out 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. It's like a whole life change, like a whoa. I didn't know myself. And I'm thinking about how in the asylum context here in the US, we're punishing people for not having had an opportunity to understand more about themselves. And we're saying we're suspicious. What do you mean you're now realizing you're gay?
Right.
What have you been doing for the last 30 years? And
trying to stay alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's such a real, I mean, people are still writing books, and there's movies coming out about women in their 30s just, you know, embracing this queer identity. And then that's about joy and finding this power that you didn't know you had. And then in the context of immigration, it's a source of sadness. And I feel like sometimes it's on us to try to keep the joy, at least when we're talking with those clients one-on-one, to sort of counter what they're going to face when they're in front of the system, in front of the institution.
Right.
To that end, can you share with us some success stories, some things that might, you know, inspire all of us to continue the fight and to welcome new people into our community?
We have successes every week. Mm-hmm. We do. But it's about how do you define a success? Right? I mean, for me, a success is the government official emailed me back. And they emailed me back with information.
Right.
Not just no.
That's success.
That's
just ignore the email.
Yeah, for me, that's success, because I'm like, thank you for giving me another avenue to fight back. Mm-hmm. So that's one. I mean, we do have family reunification successes, and that makes me very happy. So we have cases of people who, this couple I was mentioning from Venezuela. So one, it was a gay couple. They were not married officially, but they felt married. That was what they called their relationship. And we got one individual in because he needed medical attention, and we were able to help his partner get a CBP-1 appointment, and he was able to enter 3 weeks later. And they're reunited, and they're pursuing their claims together. They're living together, and for me, that's huge.
Yeah,
like they're with their person.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm never gonna forget that, because it was such a small thing we did. It was emails. I never even met them in person, but I know that they're together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I can't think of a specific success story right now either, but know that people who are able to secure legal representation are more likely to have these success stories. Folks that have access to these resources are more likely to have them, and they happen every day in different corners of this country. Mm-hmm. So they exist. There are definitely people who are able to go through the system and tough it out along with their attorneys and advocates and realize their dream of being in a safer place. Mm-hmm. Again, Jen mentions it depends on what you qualify as a success. Sometimes success is finding someone shelter for the next month. At least for the next month, you don't have to wonder where you're going to sleep.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes success is, okay, you can go here for treatment. That way your treatment is not interrupted. You don't run out of medicine. So again, community makes success happen. Community allows people to continue afloat.
And it's not a final destination. It's just signposts along the way that you reach and you keep on pushing towards, because once you reach a personal success, or in a particular case, that opens the doors to perhaps or even more of the process being a little bit easier for them.
Totally.
To that end, what about costs? I would assume that a lot of the people that you counsel are not in a position to pay for your services. So one, how do you all handle that? And two, how are you all funded?
Oh, wow, funding. Well, it's the grace of private donors, but mostly foundations and grants. And let me tell y'all, really hard to build programming, reliable programming, when every year you got to reapply for the same grant, the same foundation, and hope that they give you the same, if not more money, so you can keep paying your staff and deliver the services. The majority of our services are free because of this grant that we apply for. Also, the Mexican consulate here, y'all, a real ally. Mexican consulate in El Paso has a fund to support Mexican nationals in the area who are pursuing immigration claims, and so it covers their fees if they qualify. And it's dependent on their current status and how much money they're earning. But that's a lifeline. And super cool, super creative, and also just so interesting and disconnected from how the Mexican government might be doing this work in Mexico.
Interesting. Yeah, they kind of have their own little bubble and kind of get things done.
Absolutely, they are getting it done. Absolutely, they're an ally. But other than that, some people will do payment plans if it's smaller. We support people with fee waivers when that's available. But we try not to turn anyone away over finances.
Great.
Also, I have one more success story. Is it too late to share?
Not at all.
Okay.
We love those.
This was one of my favorite cases, but it was a trans woman from El Salvador, and I represented her to pursue her citizenship. She had been stopped by New York police 3 different times and charged with prostitution. Super common. There's so many studies around the U.S. about how trans folk are targeted. So we fought that, because prostitution, by the way, is a reason to find someone ineligible to become a citizen.
I see.
And we fought that real hard. Found evidence of investigations into NYPD and their discrimination against trans and the queer community. She's a citizen, y'all, since last January.
Excellent.
And I feel real good about that.
Now, moving forward, one last thing. Obviously, the politics of our country and the upcoming election are moving targets, and we seem to learn different things every single day. What is your all's take in terms of the dangers and or pitfalls of the outcome of the election either way?
I'll start.
Go ahead. It's a loaded question.
This is called Queer on the El Paso, so I think people know what our agenda is. It's no real surprise. This is not Fox News.
I know. So many layers.
I'll start by saying, no matter who wins, immigration, queer rights is at risk. The safety of our community, as they are trying to find pathways, is at risk no matter who wins. The tone is very clear that both sides, all sides, are comfortable making the immigrant the enemy.
Right.
They're the reason our economy's not great. They're the reason we're unhappy with a slew of things.
They're the reason you're unemployed.
Yeah. And so I would say we have to stay vigilant. my view, my perspective in my work is I don't really, whoever wins, I know I have an uphill battle, and I know my clients have an uphill battle, and I'm prepared for that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this work for 13 years now, and I can't tell you that any administration was an easy coast through. It's always been an uphill battle, so I think for those of us in this field, we don't expect it to be any different. Along with staying vigilant, I would like to push folks to not just stay vigilant, but find out the particulars. For example, we were talking about the Remain in Mexico program and how it's no longer a thing. It was just rebranded. So get informed about what the rebranding of old policies or currently policies are and what they will mean in the day-to-day lives of people.
But I gotta say, we're hearing the left parrot the xenophobic, white supremacist terminology of the right. And that scares me. That's real. And so when we say pay attention to the particulars, notice that language. I mean, I was in a court hearing where a federal judge entertained the idea that Texas was being invaded by immigrants. That is insane. But it was entertained in a federal courthouse. So my message to everyone is channel our joy, but channel it to advocacy, because it's like what Gabby said, right? Queer rights are they're relevant beyond just your pride and also the ability to walk around safely. It's relevant across all specters.
So in that same vein, is there a clear path to ever fixing immigration one way or the other?
Ceci, you're gonna ask me that?
I'm gonna ask you. I think I want to have faith in people. I think people are inherently good. And I believe that they care about others.
Yeah.
But again, I'm optimistic.
I believe that too, but I guess my view, okay, this is Jen Babaie speaking as herself and not as a representative of the organization, but we need a capital R revolution and not just editing some of the laws. That's my view.
Right,
and
a clean slate.
A clean slate. Of course, I think operationally we could design a system where we keep folks safe and we have a channel so that you can migrate and move without it being so traumatizing that you have permanent mental and physical effects from what you went through.
I would think that you'd have to have that at least hope in your brain to keep doing the work you do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we energize each other to build that hope.
Yeah.
So I feel like whatever progress is made is going to heavily rely on community. Anytime you hear a program opens up, a venue for doing it right opens up, know that there was community behind it, and know that it was decades of advocating as well. Hardly are options available just out of the goodness of the government's heart. It's know that there was always a group of people advocating for that decades before.
Well, this has been very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Gabby, Jennifer, we've really enjoyed this, and I'm sure that we'll talk again at some time in the future. And I know that this is a subject that is going to continue to be on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, perhaps even misinformed people. But hopefully we've served to shed a little light on some of the situations regarding the queer community.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
That was really impressive to learn about what Los Americas can do for immigrants here in El Paso. That's amazing to me.
I agree. It's really complex, the stuff that they have to do. No wonder it's hard to get anything really fully finished and accomplished.
And a lot of what they do is based on intuition and on bending the rules and having to work around issues that they may not have been planned or not written into policy.
I agree. I mean, it really is amazing. And the way they talked about how they kind of have to kind of read between the lines and kind of assess what's the best path for them to move forward in the immigration hearings. And then also how they kind of shed some light on how sometimes the immigration court is kind of like the villain in these cases. They're just looking for ways to punch holes in your case.
To say no to people. We hear that dialogue of do things right, come in the right way, and file your paperwork, and pay your fees, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, and that's just not the case.
It's never really been the case. We've kind of lived behind this myth about the Statue of Liberty and give us your poor and hired, and we've kind of created this whole idea of what it is to become American, and in reality, that's not what's happening on the front lines at all.
No.
Yeah, it's a design meant to keep you out.
The other thing was a little bit disheartening to learn, but I completely understand, is I personally have hopes that we will have a Democrat in office, and it looks like that might be Kamala Harris.
Yes.
But that's a big job for anyone to take on. I think that we're going to be in a better position should a Democrat take office, and so that always brings to mind the need for us to remind everyone to vote, particularly those of us that are out and have gone through the process of celebrating our own pride and our own identities here in this country, to look at people that are coming here that have just fighting for that very chance to do the same thing. It makes it that much more important for us to get out and vote this November.
Yeah.
To vote with others in mind, not just yourself. To vote in terms of freedoms that you take for granted may not be so for others, and so keep that in mind when you're choosing your legislators.
And women especially also need to come out in full force, because reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, those are all on the ballot.
Yeah, and we've said it here before, but I think now it's becoming more and more true.
If you're interested in learning more or volunteering at Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center, follow the link at our website, www.queeronda.com. That's www.queeronda.com.